Bell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to warmly welcome the Honourable Lady for Saffron Walden. She has done a fantastic maiden speech and she is a great credit to her community. It was delivered with verve and class and a great deal of wit, and whilst I might not have agreed with everything that she said, I'm sure her contributions will be very welcome to this chamber. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the world looks on as the UK as the Brexit negotiations develop, to see how we will manage the situation that we find ourselves in, how we manage it and what kind of relationship we plan to have with the EU and indeed the rest of the world. Without a coherent strategy and seemingly bereft, I'm afraid, of ideas or, as we've seen in recent photos, notes, I suspect the external image of how things are going are not entirely positive. Our international reputation is on the line, and we on these benches do welcome the opportunity to debate the real impact of leaving the EU and what it will have on our international influence and clout. There is a risk that as a result of leaving the EU, the UK will be marginalised and diminished on the international stage. Now, I know nobody in this chamber wants to see that, but there will be inevitably a reduction, if not a complete loss, of ability to impose meaningful sanctions on our own, nor the ability to make any meaningful contribution to a progressive international agenda. And one of the government's own colleagues, the former Foreign Secretary, has called for the UK to keep its seat on the EU's Political and Security Committee. Hopefully, the Secretary of State and his colleagues will enlighten us to whether he agrees with his colleague. And sanctions rarely operate, as has been said already, effectively in isolation. Success depends on a combined dialogue, agreement and conflict prevention between various countries. Clearly, working with the EU presents a broader range of available tools as compared to the UK operating alone. Giving up our seat at the sanctions table will see the UK lose the ability to apply sanctions with the same breadth and weight. The UK will also lose access to key forums through which to push ongoing momentum and accord among fellow EU member states. Madam Deputy Speaker, there must not be any serious divergence from EU partners in sanctions. The UK must not relax any sanctions that are materially more restrictive than existing or new EU sanctions, especially where the UK has significant trade with a particular country. Many have raised concerns that the UK may be dragged onto the new US President's rather unpredictable turf. For example, as President-elect, he severely criticised the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. If he were to impose new sanctions on Iran, there might be pressure on the UK and our special relationship to follow suit. The new US President has also indicated that the US would ease sanctions on Russia. The EU's Foreign Policy Chief, Federica Mogherini, has indicated the EU will not change its policy towards Russia even if the US does. The UK must do likewise. Leaning closer to an administration led by Donald Trump creates concern for many, and we must hear from the government that it will continue to take its international obligations seriously, keeping fairness and decency at the heart of any new trade deals and sanction policies. And the EU, as the largest trade bloc in the world, is the biggest global aid donor and a notable international investor. It adds weight to the UK's foreign and security policy efforts. Commenting on the possible impact of Brexit on the EU's own sanctions policy, Dr. Erica Moret at the Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva recently said, a Brexit-weakened EU sanctions policy is likely to intensify the need to employ other, more expensive, controversial or complicated forms of diplomacy, coercion or pressure. It will also likely strengthen Russia's hand against Europe as it benefits from a fragmented Europe with a weaker toolbox of security instruments at its disposal. Those comments are deeply concerning and should worry us all. And a Commons Foreign Affairs Committee report said that the United Kingdom's relationship with Russia gave an interesting insight into trouble ahead for the UK acting alone on sanctions. The report concluded that it will be increasingly difficult to sustain a united Western position on sanctions, not least if they become a bargaining point during Brexit negotiations. Our worry, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that there is everything to play for, but also everything to lose. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we should all be concerned, because our international role and responsibilities extend much further than just Russia. On the 4th of April, the latest in a series of barbaric chemical weapons attacks took place In Khan Shaykhun in Syria, more than 80 people were killed and estimates suggest that more than 500 were injured. Just this week in Brussels, the UK was able to play a central role in imposing sanctions against those who were involved in that horrific attack. The EU's Foreign Affairs Council agreed on Monday that 16 individuals will be sanctioned, their movement restricted and their assets frozen. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, after Brexit, the UK will be diminished and we will have no clout to impose meaningful sanctions, resulting in the UK losing its opportunity to contribute to a progressive international agenda. And after Brexit, the UK will need to establish, as we know, the necessary independent policy development and sanctions design architecture, for which it has mostly relied on Brussels up until now. But if... I'll be happy to give them.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's making some very important points. But does this not underline the arguments that she is making about the complexity of imposing travel bans, asset freezes and the rest, and stopping those who are the target of sanctions? Does this not underline the argument for a proper transition period when we are looking at our withdrawal? The suite of instruments that she refers to are complex in their nature, not least legislatively. I do not see how we're going to be able to complete the process of putting in place a framework that we can apply independently in the tiny timescale that we have before our scheduled exit from the European Union.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I think he may have been reading my mind as I come on to my next point, because, you know, if the UK government can't agree amongst themselves on a transition policy for Brexit and a deal, as we've seen this week with the vastly differing approaches of the Chancellor and the Trade Secretary, then I and others seriously doubt their capacity to design sanctions architecture, let alone agree on what and where those sanctions should be applied and imposed. And even if they do, the effectiveness of a UK-only applied sanctions will be severely diminished. The UK government's own white paper sets out in pretty stark language that the UK needs to be able to impose and implement sanctions in order to comply with our obligations under the United Nations Charter to support our wider foreign policy and national security goals. Many of those current powers flow from the European Communities Acts, so we need new legal powers to replace these. It is not possible to achieve this through the Great Repeal Bill, as preserving or freezing sanctions would not provide the powers necessary to update, amend or lift sanctions in response to those fast-moving events. And events are moving fast. We do have a short period, so the government needs to think very carefully and give us a response on that transition period. Any new legislation must be clear about how these powers will be developed and implemented, and further to that what infrastructure and regulation will look like to support these new powers. Additionally, the Law Society of Scotland has raised a number of pertinent points in relation to the UK Government's White Paper. Points raised by the Law Society of Scotland are significant because they highlight the complexity, as the Honourable Gentleman has just there, the scale of the task at hand, not to mention just how many sectors and areas of competence will be impacted by exiting the EU, and the need for a new set of rules and regulations. It is very clear that lawyers, accountants and consultants are going to be very busy over the next few years, and no doubt considerably richer. But what estimation has the government made of the cost of training lawyers and accountants on these new laws and regulations? And what provision has been considered for the teaching of new regulations and laws at our universities, colleges and institutions? We need to have a workforce who will be ready to go when that arrives. An interesting point about cross-border jurisdiction also arises on page 23 of the government's white paper, and the Law Society of Scotland are very concerned about this, because it identifies special advocates as barristers in independent practice of the highest integrity, experience and ability from civil and criminal practices. They are bound by the ethical standards of the Bar Council. And I know that many in the profession would like clarity and assurances that special advocates should be able to be drawn from the ranks of not only the Bar in England and Wales, but the Bar in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and from suitably qualified solicitor advocates in all of these jurisdictions. Yet again, it appears the UK government, whether by accident or intent, has failed to recognise at a most basic and fundamental level the other devolved nations that exist. And according to the Law Society of Scotland, the government's proposed additional powers to seize funds and assets in order to freeze them appears to be unrelated to the withdrawal of the UK from the EU. This, therefore, seems like a curious thing to sneak in. Can the Secretary of State clarify why this has happened at this juncture. It concerns me, and I'm sure others, that the UK Government would introduce new legislation that is potentially unrelated to the UK exiting the EU. It's not good practice, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we need to understand the rationale. It's clear the UK Government is going to have very little, if no time, to do its day job as it deals with the enormity of Brexit. But the Government has some serious questions to answer on how they will manage to develop their sanctions policy. It is key to our reputation on the global stage and how we will work with the rest of the world.